early on at the Herald Tribune, out of the blue, they sent me to Cuba. I didn't speak Spanish, but they sent me there. We were doing a special section on Cuba. And the garden editor of the Herald Tribune was a guy named Johnny Johnson. He was about 6'3" or 4". I think he weighed about 120 pounds. He was thin as a rail. And every day at just about noon, he'd walk by my desk and tap me on the shoulder and say, you know, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. He had a watch that every number on it was 5. He said, I think it's time for a martini. And he'd go down to Blake's, which was the hangout for the Herald Tribune. And he would start drinking martinis at about 5 minutes after noon. And he would drink them till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and never bat an eye. I mean, he could put away martinis like anyone else would put away water. And he heard that they were sending me to Cuba. And he said out of the blue, he said, my son is running an agricultural mission to Cuba. And he said, he can help you around down there. And I said, that's fine. So I gave him a call. And I got back to my quarters. And out of the blue, I got a call from Johnny Johnson, Jr. And he said, Gene, I understand you're coming down here tomorrow. And I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, I understand you like Ernest Hemingway. And I said, oh, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to have a little cookout. And he said, Ernest is going to be there. Would you like to go? And I said, oh, my God, yes. And so I flew in, and the next morning he sent over an embassy car and took me to this cookout and introduced me to Hemingway. I had 2 idols in writing. Robert Frost, I took a course, no credit course with him at Dartmouth. And here I meet Hemingway. And we hit it off beautifully. And the next day, we went to the Floridita, which is where he hung out. And we sat and drank frosted, what the heck was it? He used to eat, drink. And anyhow, we would sit there and drink them, and frosted daiquiris. And we got hitting it off good because we got talking about World War II and his coverage of the war, which I had known. He covered it for Collier's magazine. And we're sitting there having drink, and he looked up and said, oh my God. I said, what? And he said, here comes that Navy captain. He's a complete bore. So the Navy captain comes walking over to us, and good afternoon, Ernest. And Hemingway said, this is Gene Smith from the Herald Tribune. And he said, well, may I join you? And he said, well, you can, but you won't understand. We're talking about combat, and you don't know anything about that. So the captain sat down and joined us. And Hemingway was his usual crude and nasty self to the captain, but he stayed on. And as I say, Hemingway and I hit it off very well. He, out of the blue, he said to me, have you read The Old Man and the Sea? Which had just come out around then. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, why don't you have a copy of it here so I can autograph it? And I said, I didn't buy a book. I said, I read the proofs which we got at the Herald Tribune. And out of the blue, a couple of young ladies came over, and he autographed books for them. But I never did get an autograph for my proofs. But we met several times afterwards at the Floridita and spent a lot of time drinking daiquiris. That was a truly enjoyable time. And then I moved on to the New York Times.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your interaction with Robert Frost? Because you knew he was a big baseball fan, right? So
oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, no, it was the poet that I mentioned.
Robert Frost, right?
No. Oh, yeah, Robert Frost.
Tell me a little bit about...
Well, I came out of hockey practice, and my hair was frozen and everything, and he had this seminar, no credit course, that I invited people to, and I was invited to join it. And the professor who ran it, I came from hockey practice and walked in, and Professor Egger said, Robert, he said, this is Gene Smith. He's the hockey player who doesn't like poetry. And I said, hey, wait a minute, Professor Egger. It's not that I don't like poetry. It's that I don't like the way it's taught at Dartmouth. And Frost said to me, what do you mean? And I said, well, this professor. And he said, no names, please. I said, okay. This professor said Gene doesn't like poetry, and I said, it's not that I don't like poetry, it's I don't like the way it's taught at Dartmouth. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, they tell you what is the meaning behind the poetry. I said, like for your poetry, and I have miles to go. And he said, don't tell me who the professor is, tell me what they say. And I said, well, he interprets that as your hidden thoughts about committing suicide. And Frost grabbed me and says, good God, don't tell me who that was or I'll cane him to death. And from then on, Frost and I were good buddies. We used to argue about who was the better ball player, Tris Speaker or Ted Williams. I thought Speaker was, but for the sake of arguing, we would argue and I would insist that it was Ted Williams. That was a great thing to have. And then, like I say, I get to know Hemingway, the two writers I admired the most.
So, why did you like literature and writing and reading so much? Why do you?
Well, I originally started out, before I went into the infantry, I wanted to be an ophthalmologist because as a teenager I'd gotten hit in the eye with a hockey stick and it caught my eye wide open and split it. And they rushed me to the Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary and they saved my eye. And as I say, I wanted to be an ophthalmologist. But when I got out of the Army, I got to thinking, God, I've got to go back to college for 3 years, and then a medical school for 2, and then to ophthalmology school. I said, by the time I get started, I'll be old and gray. And I always enjoyed writing, so I switched to writing. And out of the blue, as I said, I got an offer from the Wall Street Journal and went to work for them right away. And then got all these other jobs. I never looked for a job. I was offered them, like from the Herald Tribune and from the Times. It was a easy way to get started, and it was a truly enjoyable career.
Can you tell me about maybe 1 or 2 of your favorite stories you ever did, and why?
Yeah, one of them was an Army, U.S. Atomic Energy Commission experiment that they had out in southern Arizona, up by the Four Corners. They got to thinking that if you detonated an atomic bomb down into a deep deposit of oil or gas, it could crack it and make it easy to extract. So they brought in reporters from around the world, and we were delayed because of weather conditions, and then finally they detonated. We were about 2 miles away, and we could hear the detonation, we could feel the ground shake. And the guy doing the briefing afterwards said, and we believe that this fusion project has worked perfectly. And no one's asked a question, so I went over to him afterwards and I said, "You said fusion." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, that means you used a hydrogen bomb, not an atomic bomb." And he said, "That's right." And I said, "Well, don't tell anyone, but can we go and see it?" And about 2 hours afterwards, we went out in a Jeep and got to the site. And all there were a couple of 2-inch cracks in the road and the territory around. But it was perfectly no radioactivity or anything. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. But for some unknown reason, they never extracted the natural gas. It was a wasted project. That was probably one of the most interesting projects I ever covered. And I'll try to think of another.
Did you ever interview somebody super, like a famous person or maybe an older person, somebody that had a lot of history or something that you had history?
Well, I interviewed just about everyone. I did interview Ronald Reagan. I forget what it was about, but when I went in to do the interview, I said to him, "You know, my wife sends her best regards." And he said, "Do I know your wife?" And I said, "Yeah, she was a student at the University of Southern California, and she interviewed you for the magazine, and then she interviewed you when you became a movie star." And he said, "What's her name?" I said, "It was Lois Weber." Oh, he said, "Oh, yeah." And a few months later, I was in Houston, Texas on an assignment, and I was wearing Bermuda clothes, a Bermuda jacket and Bermuda pants. And we were at this real posh country club in Houston, and I was heading into it, and all at once I get a tap on my shoulder, and here was Ronald Reagan, and he said, "The gentleman from the Times is dressed the way I would prefer being dressed." He was in a tuxedo. He had remembered me, and we chatted for a bit, and then he went into his meeting and I went into mine.
Wow. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to interview any of your favorite sports athletes?
Indirectly, not interview. As a sideline when I was in New York, I coached youth hockey. And through a friend, he brought in for our tryouts Bobby Orr, who was doing publicity for, I forget who it was, but Bobby and I hit it off beautifully. And every spring, every fall, when we'd have tryouts, Bobby would fly in from Boston to New York and work out with the kids. And we got to be very good friends. He was one of my idols. And it was a very delightful meeting and a delightful friendship. I think the most interesting thing about the job that I had was the variety of things that we did, and the variety of people that we met. I mean, from just a local person and what they were doing to keep warm during winter and cool during summer and so on. But it gave me an opportunity to meet a wide range of people, not on the supply end, but the interviewees.
Yeah.
And also, for a person who is interested in sort of traveling, you get to see the entire United States for sure. And as I told you, Cuba and Hong Kong and Alaska.
Yeah.
Those are three of the most memorable sites.
So what are some of the topics that you used to cover on regular,
Well, discovery of oil and gas, new technologies.
Was there technologies that are used now that they were kind of researching when you were kind of working?
Yeah. Well, the most notable that's working regularly is nuclear. When it came about that they were going to do it, there was widespread opposition from the anti-nukes. One of the sites was here in Seabrook, and I flew up several times when they were picketing. All they were doing was picketing and no nukes, no nukes. And that was one of the things. We also covered the beginning of wind power, and there again, these people that were against such things protested wind power because of the so-called flutter effect of the blades and the noise. Well, I've gone to that wind turbine in Newburyport and stood right at the bottom of the thing when it's running full speed. And there's nothing you hear. You hear a little bit of a whish, whish, whish. But it's no more than the nearby breeze at the same time.
Yeah.
And people are against natural gas because of extracting it and what the extraction process did to the
fracking and
environment. Well, that was before fracking, but they were actually fracking, but they didn't call it that then. And coal, the people are against coal. Notably here in Massachusetts, they forced the closure of the Salem station,
yeah,
which they converted to natural gas, and these same people opposed that. No matter what the source is, someone is going to oppose it.
Yeah. What in your research over the years, what do you think is the most sustainable thing to do, or maybe the top? Do you have a couple that you think, through your research and talking to different, people that are kind of experts? What do you think the best way is to go?
Well, I think using the existing resources. Coal, I'm very much in favor of coal. They have ways of protecting against the so-called smog and so on.
Yeah.
And natural gas for the same reason. There's no problem there. And the antis don't say it's a pollution thing, but they don't want the depletion of natural resources. I don't know what they do want. They never offer that. But that's a standing thing. And it was interesting to talk to people in various areas as to what they were using and how they felt about things like this. Here in New England, we're the last region in the nation, and still so, that uses coal.
Yeah.
And people are death against that. So if you suggest to them, well, if you don't do it, you'll be freezing in the winter and roasting in the summer, but they won't have any of that.
Huh.
They just have got their mind set, and you can't try and convince them. As a reporter, you don't try and convince them. You try to get it out of them and then work it into some kind of a pattern that's worth reporting. So I'd say that was one of the interesting things. The spread of people that you get to meet was very interesting. Some were knowledgeable and made sense, but I'd say the majority of them were not knowledgeable. They just had practically a script
Yep.
to oppose things. If they had their way, you wouldn't be getting any electricity, and then they'd be complaining about that.
What do you think about? Because nuclear, because that was kind of a new thing. Like when was all these nuclear power plants coming in, and what was the thought process on that? And what's your thoughts on it?
Well, that would be around the 50s was the first nuclear plant that was in Pennsylvania, and unfortunately they had an accident there, and that fed the anti-nukes with a good argument, but they never pointed out that no one in the area was affected. No one became struck by nuclear outfall. It just happened, and then it just worked itself off. The plant just continued and operating at a lower volume.
Yeah.
But it did continue working, and it proved that it was workable. That was one thing, and as I said, here in Massachusetts, the opposition to Salem Harbor was for burning coal, and when they took that out, they put in natural gas, and these people opposed that too. So there's no clear answer to what people want. I think they just want to oppose things.
Yeah.
And that was interesting to get a cross-section these people and to try and report on it objectively.
Yeah. So did you try to just inform people of what was happening? Is that what you used to try when you wrote?
Well, I would. The articles would put in an addendum in it that pointing out, however, it has not been shown to pollute and so on and so forth. And like I say, in the case of coal, they've got scrubbers which clean out the air, but you can't convince the opponents that it does.
So it's kind of lose-lose situation, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So what are some other other topics? So you did the energy and you did television, right?
Yeah. Energy. Well, I started out covering television at the Herald Tribune, not as a critic, but as a television was just starting then, and there were widespread battles between the various television systems. For example, CBS had positively the best color, but it required a spinning disc and they tried to get it approved as the acceptable system until Dr. Dumont, who headed the Dumont Television Network, which no longer exists, but he had a color TV system, and he said, well, the discs do work fine, but when TV sets get bigger, you're going to have a 6-foot wide
Screen.
no, a 6-foot wide machine to spread the to make the system work. Well, that was a lot of baloney, but it convinced people, so the Dumont system was never, the CBS system was never approved. They went to what was at the time really the weakest system, but CBS put an awful lot of money behind it, and it won out. It made a lot of coverage, both of the providers and the potential users. And that went on, and until they finally settled on the CBS system, which is basically what we use today.
Yeah.
But those were the interesting things. The gas buggy thing that I talked about in the Dakotas and Arizona was a classic example of antis trying to stop a system.
Yep.
And as I said, the underground detonation of the hydrogen bomb worked, but for some reason we've never taken that gas. It probably is being held in reserve. Mm-hmm. But there was always something. There were people who were pushing wind power and tidal power. And again, there were those who were opposed to both of them. They've never done anything with tidal power, really. And it's an easy, simple system to work, but it just stays there. The technology is there. And I would guess sometime in the future, they'll get around to using it. But again, maybe something else will be discovered. There's always that possibility. Mm-hmm. So it's just one of these things that keeps going on, and you try to cover it and get the facts out there and let the people decide.
So why did you write for over 30 years or however long? How many? Over 30 years, right?
Yeah, I did 18 months on the Wall Street Journal and 3 years on the Herald Tribune and 25 years on the New York Times. And then I freelanced for about 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, so over 40 years then.
Yeah.
So what fueled you? Why be a journalist?
Well, I was always interested. As I said, I started out, I wanted to be an ophthalmologist.
Yeah.
Because of an eye injury I got playing hockey as a teenager. But when I was in the Army, I got to thinking, gosh, I mean, I hadn't gone to college at that point. I got to thinking, gee, I mean, I get out, I'll go to 4 years of college, or 3, it worked out 3, and then 2 years of pre-med, and then 2 years of specialty, and I'll be so old, I'll be working for a couple of years and then retire, and it didn't make any sense. And I always enjoyed writing, so I switched to writing. And that worked out fine. I firmly believe that whatever you're doing, you should enjoy. If you don't, get out of it. Too many people work in jobs that they don't like. And I think that affects what they're doing negatively. And it should be, you should be able to face work each day with, I'm going to work today and I look forward to it, not, oh my gosh, I'm going to work and that's a bad way to live.